afternoon and welcome to the arrival press conference of the Elections Observer Mission to Montserrat's Elections 2024. This mission is being organized by the British Islands and Mediterranean region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. My name is Honorable Shelia Rogers Webster. I am a politician from Anguilla and I am the head of mission. I am a member of the parliamentary opposition in the Anguilla House of Assembly. It is a privilege for me to be here today. It is my first time visiting Montserrat, and I just want to thank everyone that we've met with so far for all the hospitality that they've expressed to us thus far. It has truly been a pleasure. As I said, the mission is being organized by the British Islands and Mediterranean region of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, sometimes shortened CPA BIMR. The CPA brings parliamentarians together to promote parliamentary democracy and good governance, and election observation missions are part of this important function. Since 2010, more than 20 election observation missions have been organized by the region, primarily in the UK overseas territories. CPA BIMR has facilitated missions in Montserrat previously in both 2014 and 2019. We are delighted that a mission has been invited to observe the 2024 general elections. The mission was invited by the Governor, Her Excellency Sarah Tucker, and we appreciate the cross-party support and engagement in our mission that we are receiving from both the former governing party and the former opposition party. We are engaging with all political parties while we are here, as well as all independent candidates as part of our mission, and in line with our impartial approach. I am joined here today by 3 other members of the mission team. As I introduce them, you will see that they are from a range of different countries around the world. This is an international mission. It is not a mission from one country to another. The mission is delivered by observers from around the world. In addition to myself, there is Marcy Castiles, an election analyst from Spain. Marcy is leading our observation of legal and political aspects of the election. Armin Rabic is an election analyst from Austria. Armin is leading our observation of the campaign and election process. Martin Vickery, he is our election coordinator. He's from the UK and is organizing the mission. And he's done an excellent job thus far. Thank you, Martin. We all arrived on Wednesday, which has been quite an experience, arriving on an 8-seater plane from Antigua. While I'm used to small planes, many of my colleagues are not. On Monday of next week, we will be joined by 3 other observers, short-term observers, for the rest of the election week. Jamie Green will join as the deputy head of mission. As a short-term observer, he is a politician. He is a member of the Scottish Parliament. Steve Akin, OBE, will also join us as a short-term observer. He is a member of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Nikki Davis will also join us, and she is our final short-term observer. She is from the UK, and she will be coordinating the mission with Martin. For all of us, not just me, it is our first time in Montserrat. We are already finding it very fascinating and understanding the electoral process, and we appreciate the time that many of you in Montserrat are giving to us to share this experience. I will now hand over to Marcy Castiles to share a little bit about the election observation mission and what it is and what it is not. Marcy?
Thank you. And let me add my thanks for the warm welcome we have received already here in Montserrat. The important thing to understand about election observation missions is that we are here to watch, to listen, and to be curious, to see what is happening and ask questions. But we ourselves are only observing the elections. We are not participating or interfering in the process itself. The objective of an election observation mission is to issue recommendations to improve the process. There is no such thing as a perfect election. Many countries receive international election observation missions. For example, international observers come to my country, Spain, and also to the countries of my colleagues, to Anguilla, the UK, and Austria. CPA BIMR has a well-developed methodology for election observation, and it endorses the Declaration of Principles of International Election Observation and the Code of Conduct for International Election Observers, signed at the UN in 2005. Missions are not about comparing one country with another. I'm not here to compare Montserrat with Spain. When this mission makes any recommendation to strengthen the election process in Montserrat, it will be using international and domestic laws and standards as its guides. We are not here either to assess or comment on who wins these elections politically. As we've said, we are an impartial mission. We don't have political links to Montserrat or any interest in a certain result. Rather, we are interested in the process. Now my colleague, Armin Ravic, will share some more information about how it looks like in practice.
Yeah. Thank you, Marce. And we have explained a little of the theory of an election observation mission. Let me share a bit about what it looks like in practice. We arrived on Wednesday evening, and from then until the day before election day, we have a busy schedule of meetings. We want to hear from a wide variety of stakeholders in elections, people who are involved in different ways in the election process. This includes the Electoral Commission and the election officials, candidates from all political parties and those running as independents. We plan to observe some political rallies in the election, in the run-up to the election day, and a wide range of civil society groups that have views on the election campaign and the election process. We treat what we are told confidentially, only using the information received in a non-attributable manner so that those we meet can speak freely. Election missions act independently. In line with this independence, we don't share the details of our meetings and the schedule with anyone. We don't make public who are we meeting and what they say. Then on election day itself, many of you listening in Montserrat may see us. We will be out and about, inside and around different polling stations on the island. We will be wearing election observation high visibility jackets like this one, and will be observing the process. As Mercer said, we are not interfering with the process. We will be watching, listening, and when appropriate, asking questions. I will now hand back to Honourable Rogers-Webster to explain what happens after election day.
So after election day, firstly, and very important, we will hopefully recover a little because it's going to be a very long day. We will be at the polling station when it opens at 7 a.m. throughout the day until closing at 6 p.m. Then we will watch the count into the evening and into the small hours, so you can expect that we will be quite tired. Then, with all those findings, both from the meetings and from the observation on election day, we will produce two outputs that we trust are beneficial and will help the people of Montserrat. Firstly, we will produce a relatively short preliminary statement of our findings. We will publish this 2 days after the election on Saturday, 26 October, in a press conference in the morning at the Cultural Center. These will include some findings from our observations and initial conclusions. Secondly, within 2 months, we will produce a final report. This will be a longer document, allowing us to reflect and consider our findings from the mission. This may include a number of recommendations. Any recommendations are offered in the spirit of wanting to support and strengthen elections in Montserrat and to contribute towards democracy overall on the island. It is for the people and the institutions of Montserrat to decide if they wish to take on some or all of these recommendations. Lastly, you can get involved. We have an email address you can use to share your experience of the election process, or if you have any questions about what we're doing and the work of the mission. Our email address is CPA BIMR at parliament.uk, and the address can be found in the press release that we are also sharing today. So you can feel free, if you want to anonymously send any sort of information, you can send it via email, and you can trust that the information will remain confidential. Thank you, and now we will open for any comments or questions from the press.
Good afternoon. My name is Kiora Green, and I'm representing Radio Montserrat. So my first question to the panel, whoever can answer will answer. What is the specific criteria that you will be using to observe the electoral process here?
Well, yeah, as I mentioned, we'll be first taking a look at domestic legislation and then international standards and principles.
Okay, and Honorable Webster, you would have mentioned that at the end of the report, we have the option of whether we want to take the recommendations or not. So what exactly, what are the risks really of this mission, of this observation?
Well, I wouldn't say there are any particular risks. I would say generally what we're here to do is look at the overall legislation and international best practices and then offer our suggestions. We are cognizant that every jurisdiction in every country have particular cultural practices and norms, and so we're not necessarily here to impose on any of ours on the particular jurisdiction, but we would like to offer any sort of observation or recommendations that are in line with your existing legislation, maybe suggestions or considerations that could be made to enhance it, to strengthen it, to strengthen the democratic process, to make sure that all persons across Montserrat have equal opportunity to vote as long as they're eligible, and things along those lines. And so we would then hope that the relevant authorities would look at the recommendations, and then if they see fit, they could take them on board as is possible.
And not to put you on the spot, but I'm thinking worst case scenario in the event that it's not up to the standards that you would hope. There's really nothing to say that they have to accept these recommendations.
No, there's not. There's absolutely nothing. We're just here simply to observe, to offer support and assistance. We're not here to sanction anyone or anything along those lines. We're just here to simply observe and offer any sort of assistance or recommendations.
Good afternoon, Malika Mackenzie Weeks, Al Uganda Express News.
Good afternoon.
Given the current political climate in Montserrat, are there any particular challenges the mission anticipates during the observation of the elections? And how can the election observation missions like this enhance the public trust in democratic institutions, especially in small territories like Montserrat?
Would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And definitely it's some part of the task of an election observation mission is to instill confidence into the electoral process for the electorate. And we hope that there's a strong voter turnout in these elections. There are some changes to the previous elections, like mobile polling station, which moves also to the prison and to old people's home. So we also have the opportunity to follow that mobile polling station and to provide and instill the trust of the electorate and the politicians and the political parties in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's quite important sometimes to be able to have outside objective observers to just oversee and look at the process. I think that in and of itself instills confidence in the electorate, so that they know that there's someone from outside who doesn't have any sort of political affiliation, that is just observing and making sure the processes are really in line with the existing legislation and laws, and so that are on the books.
Good afternoon. James White Jr., Radio Montserrat. Now, we know elections are one of the defining bases of a functioning democracy. Your mission is basically to observe and ensure that the elections are free and fair. My main concern, and I've interviewed a number of election missions, your recommendations when they are made, is there a monitoring mechanism to basically look at whether or not some of these recommendations that you present are actually implemented?
Yes, I'll have Martin answer a little bit, but there is a monitoring mechanism, and CPA certainly looks at the recommendations from the previous period, and we have certainly looked at previous recommendations as well, and you're tracking it as the country progresses. And of course, you're also, every time you have a new mission, you look at what the previous report would have looked at, you look at the new laws and amendments that would have been adapted, and we are happy to report that there have been some recommendations that have been taken on board from the last mission. One example is the mobile voting. But of course, at the end of the day, we are not in a position to impose any of those changes. It ultimately comes down to the political will of the politicians, the elected officials, as well as the electorate in terms of, whether or not they think the particular recommendations should be followed. And Martin?
I would fully echo that. So it's for the people and institutions of Montserrat to consider these recommendations and decide which, if any, or if all, they wish to implement and in their way. In terms of monitoring, we are of course interested to see what happens in the development of election processes in a place like Montserrat, and to see which recommendations are implemented. And that's one thing we'll be looking at this week, looking at past missions and saying, okay, which have and haven't been implemented, and we're interested in why. But fundamentally, that's under the authority of Montserrat to decide what they do and don't want to do.
Well, Martin, you would appreciate that you would want to know whether or not your work and your recommendations, that they are merited. And you would have to do some kind of measuring, as to your work and as to how you organize yourself going forward. It may not be Montserrat, it might be to another jurisdiction. So how do you measure that?
So I guess I'm happy I can share two ways. So earlier this year, the UK branch of the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, which is the secretariat for the region that's running this election mission, we paid for 2 independent academics to assess our election observation work as a whole, so not just Montserrat, but across a number of overseas territories. And they were remarkably positive, and we were really glad that they were independent. It wasn't us marking our homework, it was independent academics coming in, and this is public, it's on our website. They particularly highlighted how in a small overseas territories context, recommendations that are made by an international mission are taken very seriously. They're typically discussed at a high level. Often, it's yes, no, maybe. Often it's very rare that all recommendations are implemented, but some are. And it's quite remarkable, the impact that it can have in certain contexts. Honourable's given the example of mobile polling stations here, but there are other examples in other overseas territories and also Crown dependencies, where we also have done election observation missions. So,
one of the things, Martin or any member on the panel, is that the electorate, more often than not, know anything about the recommendations. And so as to the education process, I'm not certain how that is being rolled out. When you send the recommendations back, who you send those recommendations to, and how do you ensure that the people who are affected most know these recommendations and what they are supposed to do to improve the process?
We'd be very keen for the people of Montserrat and as many people in institutions in Montserrat to be aware of and to engage with the recommendations. We make it public. So we make the statement and the report public on the website of CPA UK. We send copies of the statement and the report to the stakeholders that we have been meeting. But in terms of reaching out to the individuals across Montserrat, I guess we're delighted to have opportunities like this to be on Montserrat Radio, and so people can hear what the mission is doing. And yeah, we'd be delighted to hear from you other ways. We could share with the people of Montserrat.
I appreciate that. I appreciate your coming on radio and television to do that. What would one of your recommendations be for those in authority to ensure that people are aware of your recommendations? That's the point I was getting at.
Well, we haven't yet done the mission, so we've not decided our recommendations yet.
But I'm just asking about a provision, in your TORs, to ensure that the education, the electorate are educated about, what your findings are whenever you put them together, your final report.
I guess we don't put responsibilities on authorities. We come here to observe, we share our findings, and when it comes to the report, we share our recommendations. But we don't have the power to require action of bodies within Montserrat.
I appreciate that, but there must be some way in your recommendations that you say, listen, the electorate, should understand what is really going on, the process. So I just feel that you might need to incorporate something like that along the way. I'll pass on to one of my other colleagues.
Right, Keola again from Radio Montserrat. I'm still a bit stuck on the impact the Observer mission really has. You're saying that you can't really, for lack of a better word, get into the thick of things when it comes to the electoral process on Montserrat. However, is it correct to say that you can stand by and see wrongdoing being done? And in that case, you can only recommend that change be made. You can't really say, well, the process was not followed, and so this person should not be in government. That's what I mean.
Yes. So we don't have that authority to speak to the processes to determine what laws are broken and that sort of thing. We are restricted to, again, observing. And then providing a report based on those necessary observations. Martin, I don't know if you want to go any further.
So, I want to jump in here, Martin,
Yes.
because I'm still not clear as to what exactly is the role of the observer mission, because as I understand it, you're supposed to be here to ensure that the elections are free and fair, and you do your report, your findings, you go around to the different polling stations, you maybe attend, as you mentioned, some of the rallies, just to get a feel of what is happening on the ground. And so when you put this report together, you are telling me that there isn't a provision to say, how would you ensure that the electorate, that they know what is going on with the process? If there is a kink in the armor somewhere, that you are able to straighten it out. These are just some of the things that people want to know about, and I feel that somewhere along the line, that in your recommendations, something must be said about ensuring how you ensure that the people who are affected or who are involved in the process know of what the observer mission found.
I accept your point, and I respect your point. However, the mission has certain limitations, as you could naturally imagine, in terms of what powers and provisions we have. However, what Martin did indicate was something very critical. This is made public, and I think it is also incumbent on groups across Montserrat, civil society groups, the media, to really be able to educate the people on the contents of the recommendations. And I'm not putting it back on the media. I'm not trying to do that, right? I'm not being facetious at all. I'm just saying, there are certain limitations that we have, that we cannot impose our recommendations on any territory, and we treat everyone the same. And we don't want to give the impression as if the work that we're doing is not important, because it is very critical to have have persons outside that have no cultural or political affiliation with the territory, independently looking at all of the electoral processes and structures and then giving recommendations. We make the document public, the report public, and so varied members of society have a responsibility to pull out the important critical recommendations and information and our observations and educate the public as much as possible.
When you say that you make it public, to whom?
Well, as
Martin mentioned on the site, yes, but
he also indicated emailing it to all the persons that we meet with, including the media.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, we want to know that we have that, oxygen, so to speak, so that we can, impart.
Utilize it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you guys have already, since Wednesday you're here, you've been meeting with the stakeholders. What was the response like so far from individual and groups in terms of the engagement?
The engagement thus far has been excellent. I will say that, one, we have felt very welcomed. So persons have been very open and candid with a lot of discussions and conversations. I think they feel very comfortable that the conversations and discussions that they are having with us will remain quite private and won't be attributed to any one particular person. And so I think as a result of that, they've been quite candid. People have been, we usually assign about an hour to meet with persons. Some of the meetings have gone well. Beyond that, I feel like people are very comfortable having conversations with us, and we feel the same. We feel very comfortable engaging with them so far. So it has been quite a good experience thus far, certainly for me.
Can I just jump back in here? I know that you've been meeting with, various individuals, groups, whatever. Fast forward to election day. What will your work, what will your mission entail on election day?
So on election day, we'll actually be moving across the island to various polling stations. We will be assigned in different teams. We will actually be observing. So we will be at the polling stations throughout the day, observing the entire process from persons coming in, persons receiving their ballots, going in to vote, the process in its entirety. So we will be assigned to various polling stations. We will move around the island. We will have persons with the mobile voting. So we will be on the go on a continuous basis throughout the day, for the entirety of the day. Just as the poll workers and everybody else will be on the go, we too will be around all the polling stations. Once the polling stations are closed, we will also travel with the boxes to the central area, the ballots to the central area, and we will wait there for the count as well. And so we will stay there again for the entirety of the count until it's time to leave. So we will literally be observing every single aspect of the entire process.
So at the end of the process, voting, everything, and so on, can you just give us a sneak peek without mentioning any specific details as to how you go about putting your report together, your final recommendations? I'm just trying to get, a feel of what is actually going on.
So I'll ask the two analysts to
Right.
respond.
Okay.
Well, we are 4 people now. We are going to be more people then, and everyone is going to have its input in the report. Armin and I, we are election analysts, and we are also observing some other parts of the process, not only election day procedures, but also candidate registration, voter registration, the campaign, the rules that apply for the campaign, the rules that do not apply for the campaign, and so on. Also the announcement of results, acceptance of results, and so on. So the whole process as a whole. And we'll do a draft. We'll share the views. We are all together in the same hotel, so we exchange views after every meeting all the time. So hopefully we'll be on the same page, and then we put it all together, with our views. And then, there's a preliminary draft, and then the recommendations and the issues are based on international standards and principles. So that's the process. I'm not sure
Very interesting.
to what level of detail you want to
Very interesting.
to get.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, Mercer outlined already what we're doing, and I think the advantage there is to come with a fresh pair of eyes from outside is to have this good practice in mind of what we know, the international standards, regional standards, and then regional commitments, and see the entirety of the electoral cycles. We also talk about the electoral cycle, which also includes the media, which includes also the legal framework, and as Mercer outlined, rights of persons with disability, inclusion of those persons who are bedridden or can't vote independently. They're also looking at the very different aspects of human rights and ensure that the legal framework reflects that, and then the practice and the processes on election day and during the electoral cycle reflect that. Yeah, and as outlined, there will be this preliminary statement 2 days after election day delivered by the Honourable, and then 2 months afterwards, the final report with recommendations will be published and forwarded to all the interlocutors met. And that is then a reference document for the new government and also for you as the media to hold the politicians and the political parties accountable, and a reference document also for civil society and those activists or interested in electoral reforms to refer to it and say, look, we can improve our society changes, and with it our electoral system and our electoral processes need to adapt and change.
I mean, I'm very, very happy that you were so thorough in explaining, and you mentioned something there, electoral reform, and that was one of the areas I was looking at when I spoke to you earlier about ensuring that there's an education process. Because clearly, in our crucibles across these parts, electoral reform is one of the key things that we need to look at. Martin, international standards. Speak to us as to how the process will be juxtaposed, if you want to use that, with international standards.
I can start, then I may hand on to Merce or to, I mean, it's as the name suggests. We are this week and next week we're doing all the findings, we're gathering all the data, and then we look at that data through the lens of domestic law and international standards. And we look at it and say, okay, that's in line. Oh, okay, that's a bit different. Why is that a bit different? Oh, maybe we'll share that, and maybe there's something we could recommend there. That's the broad principle. Is there anything in more my colleagues like to?
Well, they are legal instruments, international legal instruments, and all democracies have to abide to them. So it's their conditions or restrictions should be reasonable as to the right to vote, who's eligible to be a candidate, whether the conditions are okay or they are not, whether it's too restrictive or it's generous, about voter registration, whether the conditions are restrictive and limiting people to participate or not, about the secrecy of the vote, about complaints and appeals, whether people can seek redress if anything it's not done properly. All those issues are very well regulated in international standards already. It's a very well developed practice, and as said, like the CPA has a lot of experience and a very well established methodology, which is the same methodology other organizations use because it's part of this Declaration of Principles of International Election Observation and the Code of Conduct. So it's a well established methodology, and that's the one that we work with.
Keola Green, Radio Montserrat. Keeping on the topic of international standards, how do you see technology? Technology has been slowly being implemented into these different countries for their voting or electoral process. How do you see that affecting your findings?
I think, as you said, overall, there's been a shift over the last couple of decades where technology is central now in the entire electoral process. And I think for the most part, it has actually enhanced the electoral process. It has given persons more readily available access to information. People can understand the electoral process much better. In the past, you'd had individuals in rural areas who didn't have as much access to information as persons living in cities. And now with the access of social media and radio and all of these other methodologies and technology, people are able to understand the electoral process much better. Persons who are outside of the jurisdictions can have access to the information even though they're not physically on the ground. Quite a bit of our observation and research started long before we came to Montserrat because of the technological advancements that exist in the social space. So I think it's playing a very critical role, and I think once used appropriately, it would be to the benefit of the electorate.
And this question might be a bit premature, but in terms of online voting or voting apps, is this something that you see possible for Montserrat?
In terms of our recommendations, we wouldn't typically get into that kind of detail or even that kind of prescription for that kind of way it will be implemented. I guess in our recommendations, as we've said, we're more looking at international standards, comparing them with the findings, that we'd make a recommendation like that. So we wouldn't typically get into that kind of detail. But if things are raised by lots of stakeholders, we might share it in the reports and say, this was raised or that was raised, this could be considered. We'd have to wait and see. But
Final question from me. How would you describe the electoral landscape on Montserrat presently, or is that also something that would have to wait for the
I want to read something here. Election observation, and it is part of the EU's foreign policy with respect to support to democracy and human rights and the rule of law worldwide. It contributes to the strengthening of democratic institutions, building public confidence in electoral processes. What's your take? Anybody?
Well, I certainly agree with this statement, certainly, both as head of mission but also as a politician myself. I think at the end of the day, jurisdictions, particularly small island jurisdictions like the one we operate in, sometimes we have limitations, or sometimes we have many cultural norms that exist that have been happening for over a long period of time, and it has become accepted. It might not necessarily be in line with the law or international standards. And it's helpful when you have observer missions who are independent, as I've said before, who are impartial, who come into the jurisdictions and look at the overall processes in the electoral and then say, this may not necessarily be in line with what the law prescribes or international standards, and perhaps you may consider doing it this way. And again, it's not necessarily an indictment on the territory. It's just that it's a new pair of eyes, exactly, looking at things overall. And I think that's the way we expect us observer missions to be looked at. Martin?
yes, I mean, you quoted from a different institution. We're not the EU with the CPA.
That's
but I guess
I only use that, from the CPA. There must be some correlation.
Yes, so I was going
Right.
to say, but as a number of the kind of phrases are very similar to the kind of core of what we're trying to achieve. So, I mean, as Honourable said kind of at the outset of the kind of press conference, that the CPA brings parliamentarians together to promote parliamentary democracy and good governance, and election observation missions are part of that. So that is why we do it. It's under that kind of strategic. It's absolutely fascinating. I get to learn about the island of Montserrat and the election processes here. It's amazing.
Yes. So, I don't know if you want to close something. I don't know.
Maybe just to add on what was already said on the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation, which was commemorated at the United Nations in 2005, and all major and important election observer organizations committed and endorsed common rules and principles of professionalism, non-interference, impartiality, and also with respect to the recommendations and how recommendations can be best followed up by the authorities in country. Yeah, and here definitely there's support needed also from the media, from the electorate, the political parties, to see what's the best for the electoral system and the electoral processes to evolve. Yeah, so there's, as said, in every country we have election observation mission. Also in my own country, in Austria, and we ourselves also are pushing for electoral reforms to make it better, more inclusive, more participative, and strengthen it in its integrity.
Honorable Rogers Webster, I think we'll leave the last words for you.
Okay,
in closing.
Thank you very much. I would like to reiterate to the general public in Montserrat that, again, this is an international, impartial, independent mission. And we are just here to observe the electoral process, make sure it's in line with international standards. We want to thank every individual that we've met along this way, you know, from our drivers to the persons we've had meetings with, who have been very gracious to us. We acknowledge that, you know, we are from overseas and we are here during a very important time for the island. And we're grateful for the opportunity to be here. And we ask that persons continue to engage with us. And when you see us, you know, you are allowed to say hello. And we will engage as well with you. And as Amin said, we will have our vests on when we're out in the public, at the rallies, at the community. So people will know exactly who we are. So again, we'd like to thank you guys for coming here this afternoon. Thank you for engaging us in these very important and critical questions. And we also want to remind the media that you too have a very important role after this process to disseminate as much of this information as possible and keep it in the public domain so that the conversations are being had. Okay? Thank you.